Hi, everyone. My name is Ralph Bouquet, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for Nova Labs. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Everything You Need to Teach Evolution. Really excited that you could join us today, and really excited to announce that we're joined by our special guest, Stephanie Keep from the NCSC. Say hi, Steph.
Hello.
Can you give just a quick introduction about yourself and who you are and where you're coming from and what you're doing?
Absolutely. So my name is Stephanie Keep, like Ralph said, and I am I spend my life not being quite a teacher and not being quite an academic. I'm somewhere sort of in between. I work for the National Center for Science Education, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a bit. And then I also spend time working with people like Ralph on excellent evolution resources for you guys to use in your classrooms.
Great. Thank you so much, Steph. And yeah, I mean, we're really excited for tonight's topic, which is going to be about evolution education. We're going to be sharing some resources to teach evolution in middle and high school classrooms. But we'll also be talking about sort of some of the challenges that you as an educator might encounter when this topic arises in your teaching timeline. Everything from some of the common misconceptions to why it's just so important for us to make sure that as educators we get this right in the classroom. And so definitely Stephanie will be handling a nice portion of that with regards to the misconceptions, since this is something that she does on a daily basis, really. And then we'll sort of break out and share some of the best resources that we've discovered along our various journeys towards educating everyone about evolution. And then we'll open up for some questions. So definitely, if you have some questions about teaching evolution in the classroom, you can submit them two ways. First, you can, if you look to the top right, actually, you should see these like 9 little dots. If you click on those dots, you should see an app for the Q&A app. A button for the Q&A app. If you click that button, you can then submit your questions there. Also, if you've been following us on Twitter, you can submit your questions directly to us using the hashtag EVOEDU. That's like evolution education, EVOEDU. Use that hashtag to submit your questions on Twitter, or you can also reach out to us on Twitter. My hashtag will be @TheNovaLabs, and Stephanie's is KeepS3, correct? Great.
Yes.
Great. We'll be keeping track of those questions there as well, and we'll make sure to address them towards the end of the webinar. So again, you can submit those questions via the Q&A app. You can locate that by clicking on those 9 dots in the upper right-hand corner. And you can also another great feature too, you can also check out the Showcase app. And the Showcase app is basically a list of all the resources that we're going to be talking about during this webinar. Also after this webinar, so remember this webinar will be available on YouTube immediately after we finish airing. But again, if we're also going to post all those resources into a blog post, which will be available on the Nova Education blog, and we'll add that link to the description of this webinar and also to the description on the YouTube video, the YouTube recording of this webinar as well. So definitely be a lot of places to find these resources, so definitely don't feel alarmed if you lose track of all the things we're talking about. We'll definitely make sure to link to them after this webinar, and also on the blog as well. So again, thank you for joining us, and just in case some of you are sort of first-time listeners or viewers, but Nova Education is the platform within Nova, the PBS science TV show that's focused on creating great high-quality educational resources for middle and high school educators and the students that they teach. And so you'll find everything from videos that we take from the Nova PBS broadcast show to games and interactives on this other platform called Nova Labs, and that's what I work on. I do manage all of our outreach for Nova Labs. So definitely, if you have any questions about our games and interactives, you can see there's the URL right behind me. You can check out all the games and interactives there at pbs.org/nova/labs. So great. So again, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to hand it off now to Stephanie, who's going to talk a little bit about or give us sort of a primer on why it's so important for educators to get evolution right in the classroom, and also talk about some common misconceptions that you're likely to see and how to address those. So Stephanie, take it away.
Thank you. All right. And here again, just in case you didn't catch it, here's Ralph's Twitter handle and my Twitter handle. So, all right, here we go. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. So, evolution. This is sort of the absolutely mandatory quote. Whenever anyone is talking about evolution, you have to bring up this quote from Theodosius Dobzhansky. Nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. And as an evolution educator, I, of course, agree. Evolution is the central unifying principle of biology. It makes biology make sense. And yet, unfortunately, there is this air of controversy about evolution. And, so you might be wondering, why are Ralph and I spending so much time just talking about evolution? Shouldn't you want students to understand everything? Shouldn't you want them to understand cells and genetics and, and ecology? And the answer, of course, is of course. We want our students to understand everything. I would argue that you can't fully understand those things unless you are talking about evolution and unless evolution sort of strung through all of your units. But the real reason that we're here today and why evolution gets so much attention from my organization, which is the National Center for Science Education, is because it's this area rife with conflict. And I want to be really clear that this is not scientific conflict. There's no argument among the scientific community about evolution writ large. Of course, there's still active areas of research, and you can get into all kinds of super nerdy conversations with evolutionary biologists about the minutiae and the details. So it's not to say that it's not a living science. Of course it is. But in terms of does evolution occur, no one says no in the scientific community. This is really a societal conflict. And unfortunately, there are some very loud, very well-funded organizations out there that have a vested interest in making people confused about evolution and getting people to doubt evolution. At its core, evolution denial is about conflicts with a very literal interpretation of the Bible and other origin stories. But what happens is that people who have that very strict denialist attitude, they use content misconceptions to sort of drive a wedge into people's understanding of evolution and to make people doubt evolution and to make people confused about evolution. They really try hard, and unfortunately, they're very, very good at it. So this is some polling data, and it comes, and you can see here, so these are questions from a Pew poll that gets asked every year or so. Human beings have developed over millions of years, but God had no part in this process. So that would be a very strict sort of agnostic evolutionary view. And then on the other end, God created human beings pretty much in their present form at one time within the last 10,000 years. That's a strict, dogmatic, literal interpretation of Genesis story view. And you can see that in the general public, 48% of people agree with that. So that's a problem. Now I want to show this particular one because high school biology teachers, you guys are represented in red. And you guys rock. This isn't, so problems in the classroom, it's not your fault. It's not high school biology teachers thinking, oh, I know what I have to do. I need to teach creationism because evolution's wrong. We know that's not what's going on. Rather, what NCSE is discovering and trying to work on now is helping you to teach what you want to teach. And I think that these data are really symptomatic because unfortunately, about 25% of high school biology teachers spend at least an hour on creationism or intelligent design. But we know that 25% of teachers don't have that view. You can see that right here. So to us, that's a symptom of lack of societal support from your communities. Pressure to teach things that you don't want to be teaching. And also sometimes it can be a symptom of a lack of understanding. I don't think that that's often the case, a conscious case, but it can be hard to teach evolution. Evolution is a tricky subject, and if you don't feel super confident in it, you can sometimes find yourself going down a path you don't want to be going down. So let's talk misconceptions. As Ralph said, this is like my favorite thing. I love evolution misconceptions, and they're everywhere. So I want to start with this one. What's wrong with this image? Everyone's seen it. If you actually Google evolution and you go to the images, you'll see this in a myriad of forms. It's a straight line. You've got the monkey on one end. It looks like some sort of gibbon, and then you get to the chimp, and then you get some sort of intermediates, and then, oh, there's man at the end. Here we are. Sometimes you can go all the way back to a fish with this, but you've seen this before. And you maybe even show it, because this is very common. You see it in some places, in some websites that are reputable, and scientific journalists will use this sort of an image, but it's a really bad image to use. So the misconception on display here is that evolution is linear or progressive, and that simply isn't the case. Evolution is not linear or progressive. Evolution is not a ladder. It's those big, sprawling, heavily pruned mess. It's a bush. In fact, there's been some great stuff out just this week about human evolution in particular, that it's more like a braided river delta or a braided stream, because of all the interbreeding that would happen between these various hominin species. So it's not this simple one A morphs into B, morphs into C sort of trajectory that image can make you think of. That's what you think of when you see that. And there's a lot of confusion around this. If you've ever asked your students, or maybe a student's asked you, more likely, why are there still chimpanzees if humans evolved from chimpanzees? That is a symptom of this misconception. Of course, humans did not evolve from chimpanzees. Humans and chimpanzees share a common ancestor. But just as if there are still single-celled organisms, they didn't become multicellular. Not all of them changed at a snap to multicellular organisms. Evolution is a branching process. And in terms of it being progressive, there's no yardstick for evolution. We tend to think that our giant brains and our ability for complex speech and our social structure make us, the best. We're always on the right of these progressive linear diagrams. But I think that an octopus's ability to change texture and color on a dime is amazing. Which is better, So it's important to remind your students all the time that there's no yardstick, there's no measure. No one is more evolved. No one species is more evolved or better than another species. We're all here. We're all doing well. We're all equally evolved and equally successful. The species that haven't been successful are the ones that are extinct. But they probably were doing pretty darn well for a long time. Now, what happens if you are one of, to put it simply, the bad guys, and you want to seize on this misconception? Well, you get things like this. This was an article written by Kent Hovnid, who is, he's a Christian fundamentalist, he's an evangelist. He also happens to be in prison for tax dodging, but that's beside the point. And he posted this on his blog in 2010, and it was called "Possum, Redwood Tree, and Kidney Bean, Our Ancestors, a Spoof on Evolutionary Theory." And you can see, I won't read the whole thing, but he starts off by saying the theory of evolution teaches that living things are becoming more complex as time progresses. That is not what the theory of evolution teaches us. Things don't get more complex over time. It's not a march of progression. It's not a march of complexity. But if you have that misconception, then you might maybe follow Mr. Hovnid on this very strange trip that he's taking. He talks about how, because chromosomes are one of the most complex bits of matter, it would seem logical to assume that organisms with the least number of chromosomes were the first to evolve, and that those with the most chromosomes are the end result of millions of years of evolution. From the chart, it is obvious that we all started off as penicillin with only 2 chromosomes, and that we slowly evolved into fruit flies. Okay, obviously not what happened, but if you have this misconception, this might seem like it makes sense. And then his coup de grace at the end, he says, one of our ancestors must have been one of the identical triplets, a possum, a redwood tree, and kidney bean, which have 22 chromosomes each. So his point is like, this is ridiculous. And it would be ridiculous if what he was saying is true, but it's not true. And we have to arm our students against these arguments, which can seem very tempting if you're carrying around these misconceptions. So again, misconception being exploited, evolution is linear and progressive, and this makes sense to a lot of people. Do not let your students be among them. Now, here's the next one. We've all seen this. If you cover this, you've covered all of evolution, right? This is classic natural selection. This is the peppered moth from England. You know the story. There were a lot of light-colored moths, a few dark-colored moths, and then things got disgusting during the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden the dark-colored moths had an advantage, and you get very few light-colored moths by the end of the 19th century. If you've ever heard this is controversial, it is not. It has been verified and retested in modern times. If you want to know more about that, shoot me a question. But this is natural selection, right? We all know this. It is not, however, all of evolution. All of evolution occurs by natural selection. Darwin invented evolution. Darwin's ideas of evolution are all a misconception. Natural selection, which is Darwin's idea, is one mechanism by which evolution works, but there are lots of others. And Darwin did not come up with natural selection. Thinkers way back, as far as ancient Greece, were writing about evolution. And a lot of people by Darwin's time were pretty convinced that species evolved. They just didn't really know how. Okay? And natural selection is a very powerful mechanism for evolution that we have tested and is demonstrated, and it is true. It's a fact in terms of how it works. It's also a theory. We can talk more about that another time. It's a fact and a theory. But evolution is more than natural selection. Evolution is any change in a gene pool of a population over generations, and it happens in more ways than just natural selection. If you need a refresher, we're going to talk about some resources where you can learn, where you can remind yourself. And actually, even if you don't think you're teaching these in your classroom, I guarantee you are, because they sneak into examples. They're a big part of, for example, the Galapagos finch story. But mutation itself can be a mechanism of evolution. Gene flow, which is what happens with migration, is a mechanism of evolution. And genetic drift, in which you get a non-random sample because of some random event, is also a mechanism of evolution. And all of these mechanisms play off each other and result in the diversity of life and the patterns that we see in nature. Now, chances are good that your curriculum doesn't specifically call out these other mechanisms. It's rare that a state does that. However, there's still, even if all you do is cover natural selection, I'd still urge you to emphasize with your students that this is one mechanism by which evolution occurs. It's not the only one. And the reason why is if you end up only thinking that only natural selection shapes organisms, then you get this hyper adaptive view of life. Everything becomes an adaptation because that's what natural selection results in. And then some things simply don't make sense, like your own belly button, for example. And that gets, again, seized upon. So this here is an ad that was placed by the Discovery Institute, which is sort of the ringleaders of the anti-evolution movement. They're out in Seattle. They're the ones behind intelligent design. And they placed this in a bunch of publications back in 2001. And essentially, they got 100 people to sign on to this statement that said, we are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection, to account for the complexity of life. I would sign that because I agree. I'm skeptical of that too because I know it's not true. But that is, of course, they're not trying to encourage you to talk about genetic drift and gene flow. They're trying to say natural selection can't explain everything, so we need to critically examine the evidence for Darwinian theory. And again, note that they're tossing Darwin. They're making him the single scapegoat for all of evolution. And this was actually specifically in response for a PBS program, the PBS Evolution series that came out in 2001. And it said, again, that they think that we're trying to say that Darwin's theory of evolution fully explains the complexity of living things. Don't say that because it's simply not true. And then you're forced to agree with things like this. There are other mechanisms. It's not all natural selection. And so you get people like this and they could turn around and say, hey, well, look at your belly button. How is that adaptive? This natural selection, this evolution stuff is all junk. So it's not synonymous, and it's important that your students know that, even if you don't specifically call out the other mechanisms individually. All right, so mechanism being exploited, all evolution occurs via natural selection. All right, last one. If you ask your students, why do polar bears have warm coats? How many of them would say something like this? Polar bears evolved warm coats because they needed them to survive in the Arctic. And that sounds very reasonable, but it's wrong. That is not why polar bears have warm coats. This saying it in that way exhibits this misconception that evolution ensures that organisms get what they need. And that's simply not true. There's no need, want, try in evolution. Evolution is a process. It's not a guiding hand. And evolution acts on available variation, either that already existed in a population or that randomly arises through mutation. So polar bear has a warm coat. Well, polar bears that had warmer coats than other polar bears tended to survive more frequently, leave more offspring than polar bears that had a less warm coat, and they pass that trait on to their offspring. Warm coats enable polar bears to survive in the Arctic, but they don't have warm coats so that they can live in the Arctic. And I recognize that that can sound very subtle, and I'm sure that some of you are sort of thinking, well, you know, that's just their language. This is just how high schoolers talk or middle schoolers talk. But I'm going to argue that it's so important that you force your students to make these adjustments and you yourself to make these adjustments, because if you answer something like polar bear has a warm coat because it needs it to survive, you can't be sure that that student knows how evolution and natural selection really work. Okay. Here, I feel a little bit badly about this. The reason why, I'll tell you in a minute. If you can't read it, it says, imagine far into the future. Earth's temperature has risen and it's really hot. How do you think your body will evolve? Will you have a tall, narrow body like a giraffe or more sweat glands? Touch and choose the one you want. All right, why do I feel badly about it? Because this comes from the Smithsonian Institution. It's their Hall of Human Origins. And this did get a bunch of attention, and it's unfortunate. It's a tiny piece of an overall excellent exhibit, but I do think it's very unfortunate that it's there. The misconception on display is obviously that evolution gives organisms what they need. And also, I think that individuals evolve, which isn't one we've talked about specifically, but it says, how do you think your body will evolve? Well, my body won't evolve, thank you very much, because I'm only one person and I'm only going to live one lifetime. But here, if you buy into this idea that natural selection, that evolution gives you what you need, you might think, climate change is no big deal. I'm just going to get more sweat glands and I'm going to be taller so I can dissipate more heat. There's absolutely no guarantee that that's what's going to happen. Okay, it only can work on the variation that exists in the population, and evolution just doesn't. This makes it seem as if you're going to get what you need. You snap your fingers, you say, oh, it'd be really helpful if I could dissipate some heat, and then you get it, and that isn't how it works. My other problem with this, of course, is far into the future, Earth's temperature warms, but oh well, that's happening now. We all know it. Now, there's so many more misconceptions that we haven't talked about. The one I just mentioned, individuals evolve, and that can be a big trick with language, because we talk about how, you know, you adapt to cold weather by putting on a winter coat, but that's a very different kind of adaptation. Individuals do not evolve. The fittest means the strongest, fastest, bestest, baddest. That's not what it means. The fittest is anyone who has the traits they need to get along in their environment and pass on their traits to offspring, get an opportunity to reproduce. I hate the phrase missing link. It makes it sound as if evolution occurs in one giant chain, and it doesn't. A lot of people think that evolution can stop. If you ask them if humans are still evolving, see what they say. Some people think we've never seen evolution happening, but of course we have. And then there's this misconception that evolution is a theory about the origin of life. It is not. It can inform ideas about the origin of life, but evolution is not in the business of discussing origin of life. And then there's this, how many times have you heard this, that evolution is just a theory? Why should we have to talk about it? And if, theory is better than hypothesis, but it's not like it's a law. And all these misconceptions together can cause a real problem in your classroom. Now, where do they come from? There are 4 main buckets that we talk about at NCSE. The first 2, concern for the moral implications, and then disillusionment and despair, I think really are involved a lot with the religious conflict. That's, if evolution is true, what does that mean for me? That I mean I'm not special, kind of an argument. Disillusionment and despair comes in a lot with climate change, which is NCSE's other pet topic. But then you get genuine misunderstandings, which is where the misconceptions come in, and also distrust of science and our scientists. And that too is misconceptions, but it's more about misconceptions about how science works. What do you do about them? So a lot of these content misconceptions about evolution are very intuitively satisfying. And so it can be very hard to root them out and to address them. The best way is to ask questions. What do you mean by that? If organisms get what they need, then why don't I have 6 fingers? Because that would help me play piano better. Get your students to turn it around on them and get them to answer some questions. Language is so important when it comes to teaching evolution. And you really, like I said before, I don't think you're giving your students the opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge if you let them get away with sloppy language. If you ask, why did black peppered moths become more common after the Industrial Revolution in England, and they say because they needed to be black to survive, do they understand the process of natural selection or not? I don't know. But you can find out if you say, well, what do you mean by that? They needed them. Does evolution always give you what you need? See what they say. You might be delightfully surprised, or you might find a misconception that you really need to address. The best way to correct these misconceptions, you address them, root them out with questions, and then just lead, again, discovery, lead with questions and evidence. That's especially important with climate change, but it can be wonderful. It can be a wonderful strategy with evolution as well. Show them the data, show them homologies, ask them to, show them the graph of the peppered moths. What happened after the Industrial Revolution, after England got its act together and the soot got cleaned up? The white moths came back. If there were no white moths at all, because they all died, which is another misconception, where did those white moths come from? So if you sort of prod them and show them data and ask them to try to reconcile their ideas with the data presented, that can really help as well. And then what Ralph and I are going to talk about the rest of this time are a lot of these resources, which we're going to go through, which can all help you to address these pernicious and nefarious and evil misconceptions.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was a really, really great presentation. And again, I just want to really emphasize that if you do have questions about anything that Stephanie talked about or about these resources that we're going to talk about now, please submit your questions. You can submit them using the Q&A app. If you look to the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should see these little dots. If you click on those dots, you'll see a button for Q&A. You can use that Q&A app. It'll load in the right column, and you can submit your questions there, and we'll make sure to answer them hopefully in about 15 minutes or so after we finish going over these resources. And so again, you can submit them there, and also if you're watching on YouTube or have been following us on Twitter, you can also submit your questions on Twitter as well. Just use the hashtag EVO, like evolution, EVOEDU. Okay, so great. So I guess now that we've sort of done an overview of sort of the big ideas for why this is important, what these misconceptions are, I think it would be really great for us to now talk about some of the resources that we can actually use to preemptively attack these misconceptions before they settle into the minds of our students. And so let's sort of start to do that. So I'm just going to open up the screen share and start with showing a few of these. All right. Okay, great. All right, so you should see that screen. All right, so the first resource I'm going to talk about, and obviously this is something that we've worked on extensively, and definitely, Stephanie, please feel free to chime in if you have any comments you'd like to make about this resource in particular. But the Evolution Lab is a lab. It's a game on the Nova Labs platform, and it's basically a phylogeny puzzle game. And so if you go to the website at the top, you see pbs.org/nova/labs. You can get there. And basically, there are quite a few offerings. First is the actual game itself. We also have videos that students can watch and some experts that they can meet and learn about. But I'll show you what the game actually looks like. So this is the homepage for the game. And there are two main portions to this game. First is this game called Build a Tree. And if you see here, you should see these missions. And each one of these missions contains 3 levels. And I'll just hop in to show you what one of these levels looks like. But this is the level for fossils. And so each mission covers a different evidence for evolution. And in this one, students have to basically build phylogenetic trees using fossil evidence. So I'll just jump in on one of the really basic levels. And this is one of the introductory levels in the second mission of the game. But In the game, you're given species and traits and then have to arrange a phylogenetic tree that best reflects the relationships between those species using those traits. And to do that, you have to actually investigate each one of these species to learn a bit about them. So here, there's a T-Rex, and if I click on the T-Rex, I can actually see some traits it possesses. I can also just go here through the tabs and learn more about each species and the traits. I can also compare them all to see what they all have in common. So here you actually get a glimpse of the fossil evidence. And again, this is a really good way to sort of reinforce. I think the game does a really good job of reinforcing how the evidence for evolution appears in many, many different ways. And some of the other missions, for example, you're looking at DNA evidence, and others you're investigating biogeography. So it's a really, I think, a dynamic view at sort of all the different ways scientists have been able to sort of evaluate and understand the ways in which evolution has occurred across these many different species. And so in the game, so say we know that there's a good chance that the ostrich and the chicken are related, and we know that everybody here is probably going to have a wishbone based on what we saw. As you put the traits on the tree, they actually fill in these icons, these little bubbles at the top of every species that represents that trait. Stephanie, did you have a quick comment?
No, I just love this game. There are a lot of misconceptions about evolutionary trees, which are such a big part of understanding and studying evolution. And the Nova Lab really hits it out of the park in terms of addressing all those misconceptions. And it's really it's wonderful. And when I was talking earlier about letting your students discover the evidence, not everyone can go to a museum and look at these various fossils or, look at these traits, but they're all here for you with the Nova Lab.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. So this is just one part, and this is just one level. I mean, in total, there are 6 missions. And so each mission covers different evidence for evolution. There's one on biogeography, like I mentioned earlier, one that uses DNA evidence. So in this case, instead of using morphology or fossil evidence, you're actually looking at samples of genetic code and then sort of using that to arrange the phylogenetic tree for these species. And again, this is obviously a very rudimentary way of understanding this, but it does sort of emphasize the different ways in which we can evaluate the relationship between species. And there's the last 2 missions. Mission 5 covers life and disease, or death and disease. We look at some of the relationships between different diseases like HIV. The viruses like HIV, also parasites and their hosts. And then mission 6 covers human evolution, which I think is extremely, extremely important because it's something that's often left out in many teaching timelines. I used to teach evolution for 10th grade biology students. I know human evolution was always barely able to sneak it in. Just due to the timeline and to the way it was arranged. But it's very, very important this game addresses that. In addition to that, there's also an activity called the Deep Tree. And the Deep Tree is essentially a huge interactive tree of life. And basically it allows students, it's a very open-ended activity where students can sort of explore different species. And you can actually do a really cool trait here where you can compare any 2 species here. So say we want to compare an echidna and a woolly mammoth. And the tree actually flies you through this huge phylogenetic tree and actually shows you some of the traits that these 2 species have in common. And so we actually got to zoom in because it's a little bit dizzying. But if you click here, you can actually see sort of how these 2 organisms are related. So everything from the fact that they're both mammals to the fact that they're both tetrapods, have jaws, have bilateral symmetry, eukaryotes, things like that. So again, very great open-ended activity. You can have students even sort of design a project around this. But yeah, this is all part of the Evolution Lab. And again, it's a completely free resource that's available for you to use in your classroom. One of the things that we did hear back from a lot of teachers after we developed this, and Stephanie was extremely instrumental in making this happen, is that a lot of teachers wanted us to provide additional opportunities for assessment after or while students are playing the game. So if you go to PBS Learning Media, and this is sort of the big repository for all PBS educational content from all the shows and online programming, But we have an entire collection of resources for the Evolution Lab. And one of those, the newest resources that we've added are these Evolution Lab worksheets. So if you go and even search for Evolution Lab worksheets, we'll also include the link after this webinar. You can find these worksheets. And basically, I can give you sort of a quick run through of them. But the worksheets include questions for each of the videos from the Evolution Lab, as well as every single level in the game. And so basically it's a very deep dive into understanding, providing students a better understanding of phylogenetics. So there are some activities here where they have to analyze trees and sort of, get a better understanding of how phylogenetic trees can be arranged in different ways, but still display the same exact information. But it's a really, really great way to sort of reinforce a lot of the bigger ideas covered in the Evolution Lab. So as you can see here, the section on fossils has questions related to both the intro video, but also that specific level and how maybe you might rearrange a tree, or how if you were to add an additional species, how would the tree look then? So this is a very, Stephanie knows better than anyone how intense and long these worksheets are. But there's just so much great content. And of course, as educators, you're free to sort of pick the parts that are best for your students. But this is definitely something that I think, Stephanie, I think you'd agree with me, is something that's best done as like a unit almost over the course of like a week or so, given just the amount of content that there is here.
Yeah, a little feedback. The idea here was making students don't miss anything. So, when you're playing such an engaging game like the Nova Lab, sometimes you can get caught up in how much fun it is, and it is a lot of fun, but we wanted to make sure that the learning wasn't lost in all of the fun. So these worksheets are really intended to slow the student down and to make sure that they're catching all of these wonderful nuggets that are in here. So many misconceptions are addressed, like I said, and I wanted to call those all out. We just wanted to make sure that the whole experience could be as rich as it was. And like Ralph said, obviously as educators, you guys can look through this, you do it yourselves, I would suggest, and then find the pieces that are most important for your particular group. And you can focus on that, or have them do everything, which would be amazing. But it should really help. You want to make sure my students, it's a game, are they going to get anything out of it? Have them do these worksheets, and I guarantee you they'll have gotten something out of it.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And another resource that we also did, so we took the information from the worksheets and also created interactive lessons. So again, if you look for the worksheets on PBS Learning Media, you'll see these links to these missions. So basically, these are interactive versions of the worksheet that are put into this new platform that PBS Learning Media has created called ILPs, Interactive Lesson Plans. And I'll actually show you what they look like. But they're basically, they're interactive worksheets. The videos from the Evolution Lab are embedded in them. And basically, there are small quiz questions that students can answer after watching the video. There are diagrams they have to look at and then type their answers in. But again, all the content that you'll find in the actual PDF worksheets are also available in this interactive lesson format. This is something that, again, you can just easily assign students, and all their answers are tracked. So this might be a better way if you are in a really fully digital classroom, a good way of having students complete the worksheets, but in an online format. And again, you'll see here, again, there's a different interactive lesson for each worksheet, for each mission. And if you just go to the main page for any of these resources, you'll see links to all of the different missions there. And again, this is just the same exact thing, same exact content you'll find in the PDF worksheets, just in a digital format. Another resource that I want to talk about really briefly, and this is sort of outside the Nova domain, but they're one of our partners and have created some really great content, is Shape of Life. These are really great videos, really free, short classroom videos that basically examine some of the really amazing stories of evolution in the animal kingdom. And you can browse by phyla, browse by behavior, but you can basically really find some really great content that you can plug in at the beginning of a lesson about any evolution topic that you're investigating that day. So again, really great content there. And again, we'll include a link to this. And they also have resources like lesson plans and other things like that. Another great resource from one of our partners is from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And they have a really great project that I like, the Birds of Paradise project. Really, really great way to sort of drill down on some of these really amazing and really engaging adaptations within the world of birds. So if you click here on the birds, you can actually isolate. It actually breaks up different categories: sound, color, feather, shape-shifting, and dance, and talks about sort of the story for how these adaptations may have arisen. Another great resource they have is called Bird Academy. And this is a really beautiful resource. They have a great section on evolution that is all sort of about the family tales. And basically, it's a really great gallery of resources that, I mean, sort of like a slideshow where you can examine sort of the different ways how fanciness sort of evolves in the bird world. So again, this is just a few resources. These are just a few of the resources. I think Stephanie will definitely sort of follow up with a few more of her favorites. But again, all these resources are free. They're available online, and definitely recommend that you check them out. So I'll just transition over to Stephanie right now, and you can share some of yours.
All right. So I first want to put in a plug for NCSE Teach, which is our brand new program that we're really targeting at science educators. NCSE, for all of the wonderful good it's done, and it's done a lot of good, has never specifically tried to reach out to science educators, and we're going to fix that now. So we formed NCSE Teach. You can get to it at ncseteach.com. And basically it's a network, and how we envision it, we want to gather as many, just every single science teacher in America. It's no big deal, but as many as we can, and share resources, share some of our favorite resources, share some tips, and also get you guys talking with each other. Teachers need support when teaching evolution and climate change as well. And we want to get teachers helping teachers, and we want to facilitate that. And we also want to get scientists in on the action. And one of the big parts of this is the scientists in the classroom. You can see it here, and you can hit apply now if you want to apply. The idea behind scientists in the classroom is if you want to get a scientist from your local area to come into your classroom to talk about evolution or climate change, we will make that happen for you. The scientists have to get trained by us on how to talk to the public and to students, which they're not all excellent at, but we're going to make them good. And they have to work with you. This isn't, they don't come in and talk about whatever they want. They're going to be guided by you, and you tell them exactly what it is you want them to talk about. So if, let's say, you want to teach human evolution, but that's not, you don't feel very comfortable doing it, we'll find you someone to come in and give your students a lecture on human evolution or anything else you want. So I hope you all will go here and sign up for the network, and for Scientists in the Classroom if you're interested in that. This is our website's about to be all revamped and pretty. Here it is. This is the National Center for Science Education, ncsc.com. And if you go here to blog, this is all, you'll see all of our lovely faces. Oh, there I am. We talk about a variety of things on here, and Minda Rebecco in particular and I are talking about things that are of interest to educators. And in particular, I want to call your attention. These are the topics over here. There's a bunch of ways to get to this. I'm going to do it this way. Tags. Misconception Monday. So like Ralph said, I love misconceptions. And I did a whole series of Misconception Mondays where I talk about common misconceptions and how to address them, how to root them out in the classroom. My first one was about survival of the fittest, that phrase I hate, and then goes into all different kinds of things. So most of them are about evolution. There's a few climate change and process of science in there as well. But hopefully if we're going to have these up on our new website under the educator materials, but this is how you can get to them here. In terms of one-stop shops, is that the phrase, one-stop shop? For everything evolution, you cannot beat understanding evolution. You can Google understanding evolution. The website is evolution.berkeley.edu. This is from a wonderful group out of the University of California, Berkeley, the Paleontology Museum. It is quite simply the best resource out there. They are just phenomenal. If you want to know how to talk about anything, if you're wondering how to phrase something, if you want a good resource, it's all here. On this landing page here, this is Evo in the news. If you want to, your students ask you, what's so important about evolution? Well, there's articles going back for years, monthly articles about an evolution topic that's in the news. And then here, teaching materials. If you go to this page, there's all kinds of resources. Let's say you're a 9-12 teacher, you go here and you can search for lessons on anything that you want related to evolution, and it'll pull up lessons. And on here will also be resources like the Nova Evolution Lab and other places. They link out. My favorite thing, of course, correcting misconceptions. Who doesn't want that? And here are a whole slew of misconceptions. And you click on one of them, they'll give you a quick thing on it and then tell you where you can go to read more about it. It's just simply, I've only barely scratched the surface. It's a fantastic website. And if you haven't been there before, I encourage you to head on over. This is the group HHMI Bio Interactive. If you don't know them, you should. They give stuff away just like Nova does. I love working for people who give things away to teachers, especially when it's stuff like this that's of the highest quality, like Nova and HHMI's is. This is an incredible collection of resources, all completely free and available to you. You can search in a number of different ways. If you go to topics, the website can actually be a little overwhelming, so I recommend that you spend some time exploring. But here are all the evolution resources. Some of my favorites are short films. This is their latest short film they released on the biology of skin color. It's incredible. And they've got just all kinds of things. You want Tiktaalik, the theory of evolution. They've got, Darwin and Wallace come to life and tell you about how they came up with the theory of natural selection. There's more here than you could ever use, but you can probably find something that you could throw into your classroom tomorrow. They're here if you go. These are all the resources. You can search by type. And you can see it's just a dizzying amount of stuff, and they're adding more every day. So this is a wonderful resource that you should certainly know about. And then this is a new one. This is from the Smithsonian. They just came out with a whole curriculum. It's an AP curriculum for now on how to teach evolution through human examples. As Ralph said, human evolution pretty much doesn't get taught in most places. It's almost always left out of the curriculum, which is a big shame. So what these guys have done is they have come up with a whole curriculum to teach evolution using humans. There's no reason that you can't bring human evolution into your classroom, even if their curriculum doesn't specifically call for it. So this link here will take you to a Dropbox, again, all freely available. This is, for right now, it's an AP curriculum, but they are currently applying for more funding, and hopefully there'll be a version coming out soon that's for more of the standard high school college prep level. So these are, again, just a few, 4 different places for resources, all free, all of the highest quality, and ready for you to use today.
All right. Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
You bet.
All right. Great. So now we're going to get to the questions. Was that all the resources? I think we got everything, right?
I think we did.
Okay, great. So yeah, I guess we're going to jump to the questions now. So let's look at one of the questions coming from Twitter right now. Jake was asking, what are some of the more successful tactics to dissuade young Earth creationists and science deniers that evolution is real?
Excellent question. This is really hard. And I'm going to sort of hedge a little bit by saying that if there is a true denialist, I don't know if anyone saw the Ken Ham and Bill Nye debate that was on, or was a couple of years ago now. For me, the most telling part of it was when the moderator asked each of them, what would it take to change your mind? And Bill Nye, like a scientist, talks about evidence. If there's evidence, then, I would change, I would have to incorporate that evidence, or yada, 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 yada. And Ken Ham, representing the denialist movement, said nothing. There was nothing anyone could tell him that would change his mind. And unfortunately, the strict denialist camp, that is the attitude. So it sort of doesn't matter. And it's very frustrating. But the good news is that's not the majority of people that are confused about evolution. That's the minority. The majority there is an in, and there is a way to help reach them and to help them to understand and accept evolution. Again, unfortunately, as a scientist, we love data and we love to just throw all the evidence at people and tell them, well, look at this fossil and look at this paper. That doesn't work. So you really need to make sure that you're empathetic, that you show that that you want to understand where they're coming from, ask them where they've heard this, who do they trust for information, and then try to get them on a path of self-discovery. Let them look at some pieces of evidence. I wouldn't jump right into human evolution. That's or like really strict stuff, but start with something that they're familiar with. Like, hey, do you understand how the flu shot works? Have you gotten a flu shot this year? Is that, have you thought about how that works? Or did you hear this story on the news about, whatever it is? Just try to find an in.
Anti-vaxxers.
Oh, yeah. Ugh. All right. I shouldn't have gone there. But you know what I mean? Another topic of denial. But it's real. You have to be empathetic. What not to do is to say, you're stupid and you're wrong. That will not be helpful, and that will just get them to shut down and sort of throw their hackles up and think the worst of us being sort of the scientific community, science educators and scientists and people who accept evolution. So don't become what the really bad guys want us to be, which is a bunch of, atheistic, no soul people. That's not who we are as scientists and science educators. And so you just have to use as frustrating as it is, you have to go slow, be empathetic, and try to connect with them on sort of safer ground and then nudge your way in.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jacob, for asking that.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, it's definitely something that a lot of teachers do encounter on a daily basis when discussing this.
And it's frustrating because you don't have time. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, teachers don't have the time. And so you want to just say, like, I can't talk about this right now, which is understandable. And you might not be able to talk about it then. So try to find the time to connect with that student.
Great. So through the Q&A app, we have a question from Danielle. Okay. And she's asking, how would you address the misconceptions about evolution that students bring in from watching movies like Jurassic Park?
Yeah, that can be really fun. I think movies like that can be a really cool opportunity to bring evolution into the classroom. For climate change, everyone always talks about the day after tomorrow. Let's talk about the day after tomorrow and what that can tell you. But it is important to sort of understand that not all that science is right, and that there's an entertainment value, and these filmmakers are in it for other reasons than strictly education. But so something like Jurassic Park, the latest Jurassic Park movie came out, the criticisms from scientists, and thanks to blogging and everything else, scientists, like the scientific nerd community, is very strong. And there are tons of things I think you could bring into your classroom, blogs from people talking about what was wrong with Jurassic Park, namely, the theropods don't have feathers and, various other things. And I think that can be really fun. Use it as an opportunity. Ask your students, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this? And it goes beyond movies. A lot of times, again, science journalists and scientists can get it wrong when they're talking about these things. So use it as a learning opportunity to, talk about evolution, to make it fun, and let your students outsmart the Steven Spielbergs of the world. I think that could be fun.
Great. That's definitely a tough one, because pop culture does have a way of embedding itself in the minds of students.
I know. And some of it, to be fair, a lot of it is, well, Jurassic Park's pretty good, but other ones not so much. But there's a lot of good science in the media these days. I mean, I know this is off our topic, but apparently and this is not my field, but the science in The Martian was apparently excellent. And it, hopefully a whole bunch of kids are now interested in astrophysics that, maybe wouldn't have been before. And I think that's really cool. So try to take the upside of it, which is that you can actually get your kids to talk about this stuff.
Great, great. All right, so we have another question from Rachel. How do I explain the coelacanth and other living fossils to my students?
Coelacanth is so awesome. And actually, HHMI just released a very short film on the discovery of the coelacanth. So you could use that. If you go to their website, again, HHMI's Biointeractive, I think it was even a featured resource, but just in the search bar, put in coelacanth. So living fossils are sort of, they're a little tricky because they can, again, be laden with a misconception, namely that the coelacanth hasn't been evolving for millions of years. And of course it has been evolving. Evolution doesn't just stop. The coelacanth has been evolving. It just so happens that it's been evolving in a way that has outwardly maintained a lot of the characteristics that we see. The same thing with the horseshoe crab and some other of these so-called living fossils.
The morphology hasn't changed that drastically.
Right. They're still evolving, but the rate of evolution can be different, and also the way they're evolving can be different. I have no idea what would happen if I analyzed the DNA of a coelacanth, so I'm not even going to guess, but they look similar is what people mean when they talk about living fossils, that if you found a fossilized coelacanth, closely related to the modern coelacanth, you found a fossil coelacanth, it looks a lot like a coelacanth that's around today. So you would emphasize that, talk about why is a living fossil maybe not the best term. I love using misconceptions as teachable moments. And then talk about what does that mean? What does it mean that their outward morphology hasn't changed dramatically over all of this time? And, it probably means that there hasn't been a selection pressure for it to change dramatically over that amount of time. And that's interesting. Why do some species change more than other species? What is it about their deep water ocean habitat? Is there something in that? The deep ocean is sort of impervious to a lot of environmental change. It's very different from, if you live in a spring on land, like some amphibians that can change very rapidly and very frequently. It's not a very stable environment. The deep ocean, on the other hand, is a pretty stable environment. So you can use it as an opportunity to talk about the relationship between environment and rate of evolutionary change. And also, it's just awesome. Coelacanth is awesome. It's a great way to talk about evolution of tetrapods. You get the whole lobe-fin fish thing. And check out that HHMI video because it's beautiful, among other things, but it also gives you a good way to talk about it.
Nice, great. Okay, and our last question from Minton. They're asking, where can we download a copy of the presentation visually used today? So again, we'll make all of these resources available definitely by tomorrow. We're going to add a link to this to the description of this webinar, where we'll have the PowerPoint, the presentation available for download, along with links to all the resources. So just check tomorrow in the description of this webinar. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on Google Plus, or Google Hangout, we'll add that link tomorrow with links to all those resources. So we'll definitely make them available for you there. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie, for the presentation and just for all the great resources and advice on how to deal with this and how to confront it and be prepared for the questions and for the potential controversy that educators might encounter in the classroom when talking about evolution. So
yeah, my pleasure. And please, everyone, feel free to reach out to me at any time via Twitter or through NCSE. There's ways to contact me. I'm sure, Ralph, you feel the same way, but the interaction with us doesn't have to end here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and again, you can follow us on Twitter at the Nova Labs. That's for the Nova Labs account, which I run. And also, you can follow Stephanie at KeepS3 on Twitter. And she's also her weekly blog post on the NCSE, the National Center for Science Education blog as well. So, thank you, Jill. Jill says, great job and thanks.
Oh, thanks, Jill.
And again, this will be available. So if you know somebody who, a fellow educator who didn't get a chance to tune in, this is available. The same link that you came here to view, and also will be available on YouTube as well. Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much again. Thank you, Stephanie. and have
Thank
a great
you.
night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.